Hi everyone, welcome to Julie Reads Her Bookshelf. My name is Julie and this is a channel where I read through all of the unread books on my bookshelf until we reach 0. I'm recording this on the 29th of February, so happy leap year everyone. And now that we are at the end of February, I thought it's timely to talk about one of my favorite booktube events, which is March of the Mammoth. For those who are new to booktube, March of the Mammoth is where booktubers and those of you who are participating spend the month of March reading through a mammoth, that is any book over the page count of 800. And it's one of my favorite events on booktube. I don't participate in a lot of events, mostly because a lot of booktube events are so sort of outside of my normal reading comfort zone that I would need to go out and buy books and part of the exercise of reading through my unread shelf is that I'm not buying books. But for March of the Mammoth, on the other hand, I happen to have a lot of mammoths on my bookshelf that I haven't read. So it's a perfect excuse for me to participate in a booktube event, but also to kind of get through some of the larger books on my bookshelf. So without further ado, today I want to talk to you a little bit about what my recommendations are for March of the Mammoth and also what my plans are. I did actually make a video last year about the books that are on my bookshelf, which are over 800 pages. After I made the video, I realized I've actually left out one or two, but overall that's a pretty good recap of what was actually on my bookshelf at the time that were over 800 pages. So I'll link the video in the description box if you're interested. But today I'm going to talk mostly about recommendations and plans. So first of all, I want to start with talking about why we should all read more big books. And for me, it's really about the immersive quality of it. So probably the most immersive experience I've had reading a book was back in 2021 during the depth of the COVID lockdowns. I decided that I would read all 7 volumes of In Search of Lost Time by Marcel Proust. And that was an amazing experience. I can't say that I recommend Proust because he's a difficult author to recommend someone else to kind of commit to. He's a lot. But I joked with a couple of friends after the lockdowns that I read Proust during lockdown because I don't love myself. But actually, the experience was the exact opposite. I found reading Proust to be kind of the ultimate act of self-love because it was so much about spending time with myself and feeling myself evolve and as the characters in the book evolve and feeling myself completely immersed in the world of the book. It was the perfect escape from the realities of lockdown and the kind of the loneliness and the uncertainty of the world as it was at the time. And so that was kind of an amazing experience. And after that, I've always really had a great love for really long, immersive books that just kind of suck you into its world. And so I do have a couple of favorites when it comes to big books. And these are the books that I would recommend that if you are minded to join March of the Mammoth, I would certainly recommend that you give it a go. So I want to start with my first recommendation, which is probably the most basic recommendation you'll ever get for March of the Mammoth, which is I think you should all read War and Peace if you haven't read it already. So I don't really need to introduce War and Peace to you, do I? It's by Leo Tolstoy. It's set in the Napoleonic Wars, and in particular in Russia. There's obviously 2 plot lines. There's the war plot line and there's kind of the peace plot line. And the peace plot line is kind of juicy, gossipy court drama, whereas the war plot line is, you know, the invading army of Napoleon and how Russia fought back against Napoleon's armies. And those 2 plot lines eventually come together. And of course, towards the end of the book, there's a lot of musings by Tolstoy about his philosophy of history and the inevitability of it all. And this is not the biggest book that's ever been written, but it is kind of the ultimate mammoth. It has the reputation of being that kind of big book that everyone thinks they should read, but they never get around to reading. Now, many of you on BookTube will have gotten around to reading this, but if you haven't, I would suggest that you use March to bite the bullet and just read it. I don't really know anyone who's read this book and hasn't loved it. It is so wonderful and full of beautiful characters. I have so many fond memories of reading this actually during the Australian summer 2 years ago, when I was sitting on the beach but feeling like I was in the middle of a bitter Russian winter. And there are so many scenes in this book that have stayed with me ever since, like that wonderful scene of Natasha dancing kind of the peasant dance and just feeling so Russian. And when I read that scene, I felt Russian within me too. And that's the beauty of Tolstoy's writing and the beauty of this book. So if you haven't read War and Peace, let me give you a bit of a kick up your backside and ask you to read this book, because this is the ultimate mammoth, and this is a mammoth that I would highly recommend. I think everyone should tackle and read War and Peace at least once in their lifetime. On a similar note to War and Peace, my second recommendation was actually the book that I read for March of the Mammoth last year, and that is Vanity Fair by William Thackeray. I've talked about this book quite a few times now on this channel, so I don't want to repeat myself, but I kind of feel like this book is very similar to War and Peace in terms of its scope. It has that kind of big cast of characters, many plot lines and subplots, intrigues, wonderful, wonderful characters. It has less depth than War and Peace, but it is so fun. It is not easy to read a book that's been written in the 19th century and find yourself laughing out loud while reading it, but this is one of those books. It's incredibly funny. There are some absolutely standout characters, and I'm not just talking about Becky Sharp. And it is just a wonderful, wonderful read, and very underrated. I know it's kind of strange to say that Vanity Fair is an underrated book, but I honestly think it's one of the great books of the English language. And I don't necessarily think that in terms of its reputation and where it ranks in status, this book necessarily has those accolades. But I absolutely loved this book. And so if you don't want to read War and Peace, I would highly recommend Vanity Fair as an entry point. Now, you might be thinking, well, that's all very well, Julie, but I don't really want to tackle an 800-page classic, which is fair enough. So I have a book for you if you want to read something a little bit more contemporary. And that is the book Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norl by Susanna Clarke. If you haven't read this book, I would highly, highly recommend. This is not at all my usual cup of tea, but it's a testament to the strength of this book and how excellent it is that I still really, really love it. And I read it a while ago. It's probably overdue for a reread now. So for those of you who don't know, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell is set in a kind of an alternative universe of 19th century England, where magic existed, but it's kind of faded into obscurity. And this is a story of how Mr. Norrell, who's kind of a recluse, and Jonathan Strange come together to bring magic back to England, and they revive that practice of magic. And there are some fabulous characters in this. The plot is superb. I am not a person who enjoys or reads a lot of fantasy. I'm not a person who reads a lot of historical fiction, and this is historical fantasy. But I really, really enjoy this book, and there is something strangely almost Dickensian about it and its style, but it is really fun. It's really fast-paced, and you will not regret reading this. So if you did want something a little bit more contemporary, and contemporary in terms of date of publication, not contemporary in terms of style, I would really, really recommend this. And this is also a particularly fun one to spend a whole month reading. So those are my three recommendations for March of the Mammoth. They're pretty basic recommendations, I have to say, but I also think that March of the Mammoth is your perfect opportunity to read those basic but big books that you feel like you ought to read. And my plans for March of the Mammoth are pretty simple because a couple of videos ago I introduced my reading theme of this year. So for those of you who didn't watch my my last video, I have a reading theme every year, and for 2024 my reading theme of the year is French literature. And when it comes to French literature, there is one mammoth that towers above all other mammoths, and that is Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. And so I'm going to spend March reading this book. I'm not sure that I will finish it because actually over Easter I'll be traveling. I'll be visiting some family in China and then also going with some friends to Korea. So I don't think I want to carry this in my suitcase, and I don't necessarily want to switch from the physical copy to my Kindle while I'm on the road because I don't enjoy the kind of switching format. So I'm just going to leave this book home and take something else with me if I haven't finished it. So we'll see how far along I get through this book in March. I suspect I'll end up finishing it in April, but I actually made a start on it last night, and it's surprisingly readable. I'm not sure why I expected it to be very, very dense and difficult to read. Might be some scarring from my Proust reading days, but actually it's really, really, so far, very, very wise and sweet and full of really lovable characters. So it's starting to be really promising. I've enjoyed the 100 odd pages I've read so far. I think this is going to be a great read, and it's going to be exactly that kind of immersive world of a book that kind of sucks you in that I'm looking for March. Of course, I don't just have one work of French literature that is a mammoth on my bookshelf. I also have on my bookshelf the complete essays of Michel de Montaigne. So this one I've had on my bookshelf for a while now. And it's one of those things where I thought it was a 3 for 2 deal when I got it, and I thought, look, it's a less popular Penguin. It's difficult to come by. This is the complete set. Let's just get it. And then once I got it, I just thought, what did you do? Now you're gonna have to read through 1,500 pages of essays written by a man in the Middle Ages. Cool. So I don't know about this book. My kind of approaches to reading Les Miserables and this are going to be totally different. Les Miserables I'm going to read as kind of my primary book of the month. I'm just going to take it with me wherever I go and just plow through it day after day. Whereas this book I had planned in 2024 to read a couple of essays a week until I sort of get to the end of it. And I'm hoping to do it within this calendar year, but if it doesn't happen, it happens beginning 2025, that's okay as well. The goal is consistency. So what I'm planning to do in March is to try and focus a little bit more on getting through maybe a couple of essays a day to try and really make some progress, because I did start in January and it's sort of fallen off the bandwagon a little bit in February as I'm kind of busy living my life and being at work and also out having fun through the Australian summer. So I want to try and catch up a little bit on these essays. So far it's been a bit of a weird experience. I have read a little bit of Montaigne in the past, and I have to say he's quite misogynistic, but he's also strangely wise and sometimes very funny. So I have kind of mixed feelings about it. I don't expect a person from his time to be particularly woke, let's be honest. The values and morals back then are quite different, but it is difficult to keep reading when he obviously thinks women are the dumbest people ever. And so I did struggle a little bit the first time I tried to read some of Montaigne's essays in a smaller collection, but this is obviously the whole thing, and it has a lot more than sort of his most famous essays. So I'm just going to keep reading through it, a couple of essays a week, hopefully a couple of essays a day over the course of March, and I'll let you guys know how I feel about it at the end of March. So those are my plans for March. We've got Les Miserables, this giant volume, and an equally big volume of Michel de Montaigne. So between these, I think I'm well covered for the month of March. It's not going to be a high count for my reading anytime soon, as I'm working off these big books, but hopefully it'll be very, very rewarding. So what are your plans for March? I would love to know what you'll be reading for March of the Mammoth, and how you feel about some of these books that I've talked about. Let me know in the comments, and I will see you hopefully very soon.